this project then begins in Wings3D, and if you've just got your cursor over the wireframe view and you right click, it brings up a context sensitive menu. You can left click on the cube and that creates a cube. Now this is a selection tool, allows you to select either the corners or vertexes as they call them, edges, faces, or the entire object. You want it on entire object, select the entire cube, and then if you switch to corners, that all the corners will now be selected. Right clicking again brings up a context sensitive menu, and when it's on corners that allows you to bevel them. So if you bevel them down like that, you see, reminds you of Elite. If you remember that far back, you can bevel the corners down so you've got these triangles, and moving the mouse left and right allows you to control the level of beveling. So settle there, and just left click and that sets the setting. On the middle button you can use that to rotate the view, it's quite handy, and right click to reset. So now with the faces selected as they were when they beveled down, you'll notice the selection's changed accordingly. Right click and go to rotate and select free, and you can just rotate it round, and you can see it's really upsetting this shape, but don't worry about that, just choose a random amount of rotation. So that's now rotated, and using the right click menu again, choose mirror, and what happens there is that all the faces that were selected becomes mirrors for the other geometry, so it duplicates itself across those faces. Now go to select entire object, select the entire object just by clicking on it, right click again and choose do Sabian subdivision. So that has now created this effect. So there's these triangles selected within this geometry, and it's starting to make a bit more sense now it's been subdivided. If you now switch to select face, you can see that there's large areas that aren't selected and all the subdivided edges have been joined together. Under select, select inverse, and at this point right click again and choose intrude, and then just intrude a little bit. So now let's create a rather complicated looking twisted shape, but still not very pretty. So select and inverse again, and then that will mean that the outer face and the inner edge that was generated through the intrusion method will be selected. Well, I don't want the inner edge selected, so press the minus key, or if you find under here select, you can do less, and that also shows you what the key is. So less will just mean it's the outer faces that are selected now, and then right click again and extrude and choose normal and extrude it a bit. So that's now thickened the shape up, still looking quite complicated. And the final thing to do then is select the entire shape and press S, or select smooth from one of the menus. I think you can do it smooth there. So smooth it once and press S again, smooth it twice, press S again, smooth it a third time, which has now created quite a complicated looking shape. I'll just press the space bar, deselects everything. We can have a look at this strange creation. So quite a twisted looking geometry. The final thing to do then, now that we've finished creating it, is to export it. So let's choose File, Export, and Wavefront Object. Now, not 3DS, it's probably too complicated to export in that format, and Bryce won't accept it, so it has to be as this. And if you export 3DS format, it comes into Bryce unsmoothed. If you export it as wavefront, it comes in smoothed. And this is significant because if you were to do a hard edged object like just the cube and export it, then the faces would have an appropriate smoothing on. You'd have to use Bryce and select the edit and unsmooth it again. So, but for a complicated object that might be too complex for Bryce to smooth, depending on the speed of your computer and the amount of memory you got, it's probably better for it to come in smoothed. So save this. So I'll call this twisted thingy, and you'll see, or you should see in a moment, you'll notice the mouse cursor's disappeared. It's having to think about this. Right, this progress bar, you can see here, it usually takes quite a long while to get to the very end and it might seem like the program stopped working altogether because of the complexity of the shape. It takes quite a lot of exporting. Be patient. Even if it says it's not responding, as it is doing now, give it a couple of minutes, particularly if you've got a slow computer. Let it complete the export. The file will already have appeared in the menu where you've sent it, not menu, folder, but it won't be complete yet. So while it's writing the file appears. Don't try to pick it up by Bryce until it's definitely finished this exporting procedure, otherwise everything gets upset and then you have to start from scratch. Hopefully this will complete in due course. I may consider pausing the video. No, it's done it. Okay, so right, so now that shape should be ready to be picked up by Bryce. I've got Bryce here, just launched, so it's completely empty. File, import object. I'll try and find my object. There it is. And then you just check this. I don't bother with any of these things because I didn't send it with the material anyway. So it just does this little import dialog thing to show progress. And I'm going to have a quick render and have a look what we've got. So yeah, that looks suitably complicated looking. So in order, I'll just land it a bit, put it on the ground very slightly. So in order to show off this geometry then, we need an appropriately complicated lighting model. So I'm going to use true ambient rendering mode and create a backdrop for it to work in, one that is quite simplistic. And the material on the model itself is just plain white. I'll reset it to the default settings because you'll see it's changed quite a few of these, like the specular, which I'm going to take advantage of. So I'm going to set it back up to fully white and give it some specularity there for when it gets a bit of direct lighting. And on this plane, which is just a default ground plane, you see that's set to grey. I'm going to set that up to white. So this is going to be a very simple rendering environment. The render options, I'm going to premium effects. I'll turn it down to 4 rays per pixel for the time being. True ambience, soft shadows, scattering correction, but not boost light because I'm going to use HDRI generated backdrop that will provide TA light, but it does tend to produce fireflies if you use boost light, so we'll avoid that. Turn the maximum ray depth down to 4, improve render efficiency. The sky I'm going to modify. Well, first of all I'm going to set to custom sky, and all these settings are going to be black, so it should all be black. I'm going to use the haze to provide a graded backdrop, and everything else should be set down. I don't think I'm going to need ambience, so I don't need to worry about the setting of that. And I'm going to use the sun, mostly just its sun colour, to control the effect, but I don't need any clouds, so I press Alt and just click on that and it'll switch the clouds off. In the Skylab then, atmosphere, I'm going to use this colour perspective control to create a really thick atmosphere, and then that will allow me to control the colour very exactly. So I'm going to make my haze a sort of a teal colour, which like that, and the sun a red, strong red. And I'm going to set these controls right up and render in scene so I can see the result. And this should allow me, if I set this up right with the blend with sun, to create a graded backdrop. So I'll just have a quick render of that. You can see that it's got a strong gradation of colour across the backdrop. You can't see because the object, because the haze is so thick, but this is just for the generation of the HDRI backdrop at the moment. So back into the Skylab now, I've got my graded backdrop, and use sky, use HDRI, then use sky, and just the default setting will do, and that's created the backdrop I'm going to use for lighting. I'll just make a few adjustments to these figures then. I'm not using direct light from the HDRI, so it's not producing any simulated light source, so I set the quality down. That's not going to affect things. The intensity I'll leave at 5. I don't need any specular, and it wouldn't produce any anyway. In TA, true ambience optimized mode, it's only producing a backdrop for the true ambience mode to see. So I'll set the HDRI effect at 50. I'm going to re-enable the sunlight, and in the sun moon tab here I'm going to use shadow softness and turn that up to 100, because if you remember in the render options I'd set soft shadows. But at the moment still the haze is too thick to see anything. I must remember now I can set the haze down. Now I've generated my complete backdrop. I'll set the haze down to 1 on the density and 10 on the thickness, and that should allow me to see the object. Now it's being lit with the sun, but in this preview you can't see the effects of the true ambient rendering. That'll only come with the rendering process. So now we can see the effect of the true ambient rendering. Now you can see this the area there has been filled in with blue from the HDRI backdrop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check something now. When I generated the sky, did it have the sun in as a visible object? Because at that point that becomes a contributing factor to the light source. Yes, the sun was visible. So what I'll do is I'm going to turn the sun off as a visible light source, and you'll see the atmosphere set at this lower setting now. I'll show you what happens, because it's very easy to just keep regenerating the sky. If you don't set the haze values up, you see there's large black areas, which means it will not provide very much light. So that's why before generating the HDRI you want to set these values up. And now I've taken the sun out as a visible object, it won't be a contributing light source into the backdrop, and it might reduce the risk of the fireflies being generated, because it'll be only a low dynamic range HDRI that's been generated then, without including the sun as a visible object. So back to atmosphere 110. Object should reappear now, and that might have made a difference and made it less contrasty. It does look like it. Oh, possibly that's just having the sun in the. We've got the sun there, haven't we? Right. How is that looking now? Could be a bit bright, I don't know. Contrast looks okay. It's quite difficult to judge. Fairly low rays per pixel. I'm going to set that down to grey again. Maybe that looks a bit better. I just didn't want the ground to be too bright compared with the object. I'm trying to create quite an even render at the moment, because I'm thinking that there's some post work that could be done. So I'm going to change the document setup to a 1:1 aspect ratio, and because the object is quite square, and also because it allows me to show you something else. So that's going to be my render, and now it's in a square aspect ratio. That gives me the advantage that I can also try, as well as exporting it as a TIFF for post work, I can try exporting as a HDRI and use the tone mapper in Bryce and the HDRI controls in Bryce to process the image when it's saved with a higher bit resolution for the colours. So to get my decent render out of this, I turn the rays per pixel up to its maximum setting. I don't think I need depth of field, but I'm using soft shadows and true ambience. So let's see how long this is going to take according to the predictions of the render engine. 15 minutes, that's not too bad. So at this point I'll pause the video and we'll come back to it and then go on to the final adjustments. Right, here's the completed render, and it's important that it should be completed all in one go, because this means that the colour information is still available to be saved as a HDRI or a 48-bit TIFF. So go File, Export Image, and I'm going to save it first of all as HDR format here. So I'll just do HDR so I know which one it is, and save that. And then I'll go File, Export Image, and save it as a TIFF, remembering to select 48 bits per pixel. So go TIFF. So that's saved that in both those formats, as well as accepting 1:1 aspect ratio images. The HDR tab in the Skylab will also accept 2:1. So here's one in the aspect ratio of 2:1, and again I'll save that as I made this one in exactly the same way as described in the video. I just did a different shape, that was all. And the ground is a bit brighter, so that changed the contrast of the image slightly, which might demonstrate something in postwork. I don't know yet because we've not tried. So I'll export image, HDR, so we'll call that _HDR, save that. It's a little bit larger, so it'll take a little bit longer to save. And so the dialog got stuck because I've got Camtasia Studio running. And I'll export this as a TIFF, and again 48-bit resolution. The important thing being, with the higher colour resolution, then when it comes to postwork, if you want to do that, either in Bryce we can use the HDR, or in another paint package, I'll use PaintShop Pro, then you have more colour depth to play with, that's all, so there's less chance of colour banding. So we'll have a look at what we can do in Bryce. It doesn't really matter which one I use, I could use either of these. So first of all, I'll go into the HDR tab and I'll open the HDRI image that I've just saved. I'll do the first one first. So you can see now what controls have we got. We can try tone mapping it to start with. So it looks a bit a loss of contrast there, but that's okay. So supposing that I wanted to try this out, I could just export the image, and again I can export the image in different formats. So I could export it as a HDR, or I can export it as a TIFF, as you can see, and I can save it with, so we can call that tone map TIFF, save that, and we can see what the results of that is when we come back to. So it's just on that, and I don't know whether it's actually finished exporting that or not, or whether it's Camtasia Studio holding things up. I'll try altering the intensity. Yes, you see the intensity control here also works on the image, so as you export it, it can change these intensity changes. So if we untone map it, we just switch between the two now. It's been done. Whoops, I didn't want to do that, so I'm just showing you that once it's generated the tone map, it keeps the tone mapped version as well. We can modify the intensity on this control here, so that changes the appearance of the image. I could export this image, and I'll say in this 48 bits per pixel intense. And likewise with the other version that I've created, so the 2:1 aspect ratio here, we'll see it looks slightly compressed in this view, but hopefully it'll save back as its right aspect ratio when it comes to exporting the image. So I'll set the intensity back down, try tone mapping it. It looks some much lower contrast now. Export image, light probe. I want to save it as spherical because that'll give me the longitude latitude of a 2:1 aspect ratio. That's the important bit there. So save. So hopefully that, oh no, it's managed to crash Bryce now. That's not very good, is it? Okay, maybe that's not going to work for us. Yes, I know that. Hang on a second, right, I'll bring in my other one. Let's see if we can get it to work with this one then. I may have just detected a bug here. Okay, open the one that's in the 2:1 aspect ratio. I'll just tone map it, export it, 48 bits, spherical, SM, TM, save, crash. Okay, so that doesn't work then for whatever reason. Oh dear. So as you can see, I've been a bit thwarted in this video, but we'll see what we can do with what we've got left. I've done some more testing and I've been further thwarted, as I'll about to explain. Right, this is the bitmap image that was saved with the render, and we can do things like adjust the colour balance. We've got this fade correction control, which has quite a nice impact on the balance of colours, but in PaintShop Pro it only operates at 8-bit, so even if I load in the very similar looking, well identical looking in this case, TIFF image that was saved, at 48-bit colour depth. PaintShop Pro's only dealing with 8-bit, so that's a shame. I can still load in the modified version, that was the one where I changed the intensity, and also the tone mapped version, and that was the one where I tone mapped the image. But like I say, I can only process these at 8 bits, which is a shame. One thing I can do at 16-bit format is use HDRShop, because that will read these images. So if we now load in the 8-bit image, you see we get a dialog to do its gamma correction, whereas if we load in the TIFF, which looked identical in PaintShop Pro, we can see that it looks quite different now, and there's no gamma correction dialog. And there is possible to do things with HDRShop in terms of filtering and processing, but I'm not very familiar with it. I suppose I'm going to have to leave that to Horo. So maybe you can follow up with some videos there. And I imagine that Photoshop will be able to process things at a higher bit resolution. So it looks like I'm going to have to invest in a higher quality or maybe a later version of PaintShop Pro if I want to start doing things at a higher colour depth. So, and the other thing is that I can load the TIFF one from my other format image here. Actually, I suppose I would be in a position to convert this into a square image. That's a thought. There you go. I've just had an idea. Right, so we could still process this. So if I go to Image, Panorama, Panoramic Transformations, I could state that it was a longitude, latitude, and then convert it into a light probe angular map, which Bryce would be able to process. So I don't know whether to use that. I'll not use that. I've had problems with that before creating lines. So if I convert that into an angular map now, so let's imagine we've got something which isn't a square format. So that's now changed angular map. I now have to save that. Save as, there we go. HDR, which, because it's got the pixel resolution anyway, I could have used the HDR version, but it doesn't matter. Right, I'll stick this somewhere. So converted from spherical to light probe, and then we'll launch Bryce. Should definitely have done that with the HDR version, because that was 96 bits per pixel, and this will be a low resolution, but we'll see whether it works before we get carried away. Use HDRI, open, load in the converted one. There we go. Right, so that's now loaded in. I could tone map that, which is what I wanted to do, and export the image as, well, I'll do TIFF again, shall I? There it is. Right, 48 bits per pixel, and converted, tone mapped. Save that. Back to HDRShop. Get rid of that one, that one, that one, that one. Load in my converted tone mapped one, and then image. We'll see how badly this degrades the image, because obviously there's going to be some losses doing this. So if we start from angular map and go to longitude, latitude, well, 1700 back to width. I see we can also change the aspect ratio in this. Don't use bilinear, and transfer it. Oh yes, well that's the drawback there. It's not entirely a lossless transformation, but that has allowed me to tone map it using Bryce's tone mapper. So file, save as, or we'll save it as a JPEG. I don't suppose it matters really, just for the purposes of demonstration. Oh, I need to give it a name. Tone map JPG. Right, yeah, we'll use the current display settings and go back to PaintShop Pro. Right, see if I can find that file now, wherever it's gone to. Right, and then adjust color balance, fade correction. Right, now here you should be able to see, I don't know whether the Camtasia Studio is going to pick it up, but there's some distinct colour banding in the background. That probably came from the JPEG, but this is the thing you want to avoid if you can, because otherwise it would look quite like a nice render if we could get this without the colour banding. So this is the thing. having the right software, knowing whether or not you can read the higher resolution formats, managing to save and transfer it all in the high resolution format. Let's go back to this one. Let's just see what it looks like. I see that's higher contrast than the tone map version, but I suppose that looks okay. Anyway, as I was saying, knowing which software will allow you to load in which formats, being able to transfer it and save it without too many losses, and then process it. You don't get ugly colour bands, and you save the the purity of your renders as far as the colour's concerned. So this is quite a deep topic we're getting into now, and really it was outside the scope of what I was wanting to explain, but I've sort of run into these problems. So that's a rather unsatisfactory end to the tutorial, but well, that's the way it goes. I'll save it warts and all, and you can make of it what you will.